Hello again. So in this presentation, we're going to be talking about English A, IB English A, Language and Literature, Paper 2. In previous videos, we looked at kind of an overview of the exam. In this video, we're going to look at one particular question, take it apart, and give you a rough idea of how to do your planning. The key thing here before we begin is that you have to know the texts very, very well. So that means read them again, read the beginning, read the ending, read around, get some context, really know what is going on in these texts, and then you can apply that to almost any question that you get. So first tip is on the screen here. When you get in the actual exam, IB gives you a ton of paper to write on, so there's no scrap paper, nothing like that. All of your planning has to be done on the answer sheet. Most schools won't even give you scrap paper. So do all of your planning on the answer sheet. Make it big, make it bold. Don't be scared of taking up paper. Write the plan very clearly. I like to number it, or you can have little patterns or designs that you know which sequence you're going to be following. But make it clear. And then when you've done that, when you've done your plan and written the essay, cross out the planning. Just put a line through the planning to make it clear where your answer begins, and then start your actual essay on a new page. Okay, so let's kick off with a question we looked at last time. How does a particular term or concept, such as childhood, change in the way it's represented in the texts? So we're not going to look at childhood because, according to the question, we don't have to. We're going to look at the concept of honour. And to do that, we're going to use two texts, Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart and Gabriel Garcia Marquez's Chronicle of a Death Foretold. So to begin with, I've broken the question down. How does the idea of honour change in the texts? So now I need to start brainstorming anything I can think of to do with this question. So on the screen I've got some rough ideas for Things Fall Apart. Okonkwo is really big on honour. He can define himself through that rather than previous relationships he's had, such as his father, who he despises. Patriarchal society dominates women. It has a certain amount of honour there in maintaining his machismo attitude. He feels he has the right to hit women, even during, ironically, Peace Week. He's very much against change, which is the change, obviously, here is symbolised by the coming of the Europeans who are colonising Africa. And he believes in things like honour killings. That honour really does come above everything for him. He slaughters Ikemefuna, who he's up to then he treated as his son. And essentially his belief in honour and the fact he doesn't want to change leads to his downfall. I've put a tragic fault there because tragic characters tend to have faults they can't overcome. So and from a literary point of view, that's worth mentioning. So I've got a few ideas bubbling around there about Things Fall Apart. In Chronicle, let's do the same thing for Chronicle of a Death Foretold. Here, honour is clearly central. It's a great question for Chronicle of a Death Foretold. Angela's lost honour essentially justifies why Santiago has to be killed. It overrides even the right to life when it comes to Santiago. So here, clearly it's a central concept. Again, patriarchal, Angela's lost virginity means loss of honour for the whole family. It's not the fact that she's lost her virginity. It's not the fact that she consented to have sex with somebody. It's clearly her fault. She's stained by this in the same way. There's a great quote about the town prostitute Maria, who essentially took her generation's virginity. It takes away any blame on the men. So very patriarchal society. And that's useful because I remember I had patriarchal for Things Fall Apart, so that's definitely I'm going to tie those two together later on in my mind. That's what I'm thinking. And as a minor point, the society does honour religion and makes a big deal of the bishop arriving, but ultimately the bishop sails on past and symbolically seems to have abandoned them. His wave is said to be robotic or mechanical. So there's a few ideas there. Now, the next step is to take some of those ideas and tie them into a few key ideas. So, this is roughly what my plan I think is going to look like. I'm going to essentially break the question down and help myself to answer the question through the way it's phrased. So, my plan is essentially about honour. How does it change? Firstly, I'm going to talk about how is it represented, and I've got a couple of sub-points there. Honour is generally thought to be very important, and it's seen to be the ideal that it's upheld. in the text. The patriarchal society I mentioned, that reflects the honor. The second part, how does this representation change? It's a good thing to mention because that at the end directly addresses my question. My first point is there's a reluctance to change. People don't really want to change in these novels, and ultimately, 2b, that brings about tragedy in both cases. So actually, when I'm thinking about it, it works quite well. Honor is the catalyst, if you like, for tragedy in these novels. So that's worth mentioning. And then lastly, the third point. This is a really important paragraph. You can have this in almost any essay. The why paragraph, and this forces you to talk about the writers, because up to now, if you look at it, we've kind of been looking at the text and the characters and what's happened. But in criterion A, I need to understand the whole job, the whole thing, the context and everything. So I really want to talk about the writers. Why does Achebe do it? He wants to show the Igbo are not perfect. They're not this idealistic society that he's painting here. It's realistic. They're well-drawn characters. They may not be perfect, but they are real with their own culture, and all these other things. It's not just one long night of savagery, as Achebe said. And then Garcia Marquez, why does he do it? Again, he wants to criticize. They're both social writers. He wants to show that the Colombian society places too much importance on honor, and the results are quite tragic. And again, it's their reluctance to change and accept that Santiago really shouldn't have to die. In fact, we don't even know if he was guilty. Nobody seems to care. It's their reluctance to look at that causes the tragedy. And then finally, the conclusion. We're going to go back to the question. We're not just going to repeat the question though, because now I've got a whole thesis statement about why the role of honor is important. So here's my rough plan. And the brainstorming that I had, you can see how it's now taking shape and it's now in a kind of structure. And this is a fairly decent, simple plan that will help me answer. Okay, so there we go. This is my kind of thesis statement. The thesis statement is basically a claim that you're making in order to answer your question. And here we can see as a result, the author's characters, the characters' flaws in both texts, honor has resulted in tragedy, not glory. So is there too much value on honor? So your thesis statement, you want to say what's happening. The first paragraph here does that. And the second thing with a thesis statement, something about why. It's not enough just to say honor is portrayed as negative. You want to think about why do the authors do that? And that gets you into talking about the writers, which is where often the big points are. Okay, a couple of things to finish with. When you're looking at these, you need to compare both texts at the same time, like I did here. My point 1 would be about both texts, and then point 2 would be about both texts. So essentially, you may have seen a kind of apples and oranges type essay. So instead of apple, 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 orange, 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 what you're looking for is apple, orange, point 1, apple, orange, point 2, where the fruits are obviously the text that you're talking about. If you follow that, you should be okay. So again, here's my rough, very basic overview of what's going on. I've got a thesis statement at the beginning, which we talked about is how do I answer the question, why is it like this? And then possibly signpost a little bit. So mention point 1 and point 2. This essay will describe how point 1 and point 2 make my point, basically. So this is a nice, simple structure you can follow for almost any paper 2 answer. And then finally, number 1 tip for paper 2, talk about the writers. If you only talk about the characters, you make it sound like they're real, and they're not. So mention the writers all the time, all the way through. Achebe does this because of XYZ. Garcia Marquez does this because of XYZ. Focus on them, and you should come up with a pretty darn good answer. Okay, thank you very much.